and welcome back to my YouTube channel. Thank you so much for clicking on this video. Come in, welcome. My name's Eliza. I make new content every Tuesday and Thursday at 5 p.m. all about disability awareness, LGBTQ+ positivity and lifestyle things. So come in and welcome. And today I'm going to be doing a very highly requested video, which is how I knew I was non-binary, and potentially help you potentially work out if you are non-binary or not. So yeah, if you're interested in that, then stick around. This is going to be the last video of 2020. It is New Year's Eve today, so happy New Year, and hopefully 2021 is slightly brighter, we'll see. But anyway, I asked you guys on Instagram. If you do want to follow me on there, it's at Disabled Eliza, where I often do polls and questions, etc. And if you want to contact me as well, you can email me through my Instagram as well, so that's quite a good way to contact me if you do have any questions. But I asked you guys what content you wanted me to make, or whenever I do like a ask me a question or whatever, the main question I get all the time is, how do you know that you're non-binary? How did you know you're non-binary? How did you come to terms with being non-binary, etc, etc. I always promised I was going to make a video on it, so today is the day. I'm going to make a video about how I knew I was non-binary and how I came to terms with that. So let's go. So I want to start this video by saying something which is probably going to be a bit frustrating to hear, but I don't really have a definitive answer for you about why I am non-binary. I also definitely don't have an answer for you either, or why you are or aren't non-binary, but I just thought I'd go through my experience with that. And the truth is, I can only know about myself. I can't possibly know about other people, but I just thought I'd take you through my experience of what I went through and how I came to terms with my gender. So if you aren't sure about what non-binary is, and I'm reading off my notes for this one, non-binary is a term to describe genders that don't fall into one of the binary categories, i.e. male or female. Non-binary people may identify as having two or more genders, bigender or trigender, or having no gender at all, agender, non-gendered, genderless, gender-free or gender fluid, moving between genders and having a fluctuated gender identity. That's what gender fluid means. So before we start, I identify as being gender fluid. So essentially, I do not feel that I fit into the binary gender, and I definitely feel very fluid within my identity. And interestingly enough as well, when I often talk to my friends and family, they quite often describe me as being pretty half and half in terms of my fluidity. So I definitely kind of focus more on energies for me personally. That's just what helps me to identify within my gender, and I feel that I do have pretty consistent masculine and feminine energies. So yeah, that's kind of how I came to terms with my gender fluidity and how I label it. But let's talk about kind of the things that actually happened that helped me come to terms with my identity and how I got to where I am today. So it wasn't particularly a really straight road, and I'll be honest, I'm not even necessarily sure that I'm at the end of that road yet. I think there's always room to question, always room to grow, and as you age you may realise different things about yourself, and you may just understand yourself a bit better, or you may have other experiences, etc. And it's always good and fine to experiment with your gender if you want to, and you feel like that's something that you want to do and try out new pronouns, etc. So for me, it started by building a really strong understanding of the trans and non-binary community. I was following lots of people that were part of the community, and of course if you follow trans or non-binary people, that doesn't mean that you're non-binary. It's just that's what worked for me and how I came to terms with my gender identity. I would follow lots of trans accounts, lots of trans activists, etc. And also was just very, very invested in the trans community and trans rights, etc. Again, this doesn't mean that if you do feel like this that you are non-binary. That was just something that kind of allowed me to understand my feelings and start to question my feelings, because I suddenly felt part of a community. I felt really seen, and then I realized that there was probably a reason why I felt like that way. So I always felt particularly uncomfortable with gendered terms, and I noticed that I didn't really ever use them for myself or for other people, and if I did, it would kind of make me wince a little bit, and so then I kind of naturally seemed to stop using gendered terms. I wasn't particularly feeling myself within my style, and I always put that down to this idea that I just didn't care about fashion, or I just didn't care about the way that I looked, etc. But the truth is, I just wasn't giving myself enough freedom in what I wanted to wear. And after I kind of started to dress for myself, that was when I started to realise my style was much more based around patterned trousers, and I felt more uncomfortable in dresses, etc. Not saying that if you wear trousers you aren't a woman, or if you wear dresses you aren't a man, etc. It was just how I became to understand myself. Once I started to dress for myself, that kind of gave me the understanding of my gender identity, and it was me kind of experimenting a bit with gender and pushing those boundaries a little bit for myself personally. So after I kind of grew an understanding that I felt much more comfortable in gender neutral clothing, or kind of clothing that could be worn by a variety of people within society standards. Of course, all clothing can be worn by everybody, and I totally stand by that opinion, but within our very binary society, that then also made me question the language that I was using. So at the time I worked in a shop, and people around me would often use gender terms to describe customers, etc. And I noticed that I wasn't doing that. I was naturally using gender neutral terms, and that was kind of what made me comfortable, and it wasn't necessarily something that I thought about either. It was just something that seemed to naturally happen, and in my opinion, to be honest, I think we should all be practicing using gender neutral words if we can, etc. But that was kind of when I started to question why I'd naturally moved into using gender neutral terms. And of course, again, I'm not saying that if you use gender neutral terms, that's what makes you non-binary. This is just my experience through my journey and my road to coming to terms with my identity. While I was at that job, we actually had a trans person start in the role, the same role that I was in, and at the time we had gendered bathrooms, and then when the trans person started, we made the bathrooms gender neutral, and suddenly I had like a rush of gender euphoria come over me. I suddenly felt really comfortable and really seen. Even though at the time I was using she, her pronouns, I just suddenly felt really seen and comfortable in the situation. And at the time I didn't really question it, I didn't think much of it. I was just like, oh, I just am so pleased that these bathrooms are gender neutral. And actually looking back on that now, that was because I suddenly felt seen, and as if, you know, now there was a place for me to go to the toilet, whereas before I was feeling uncomfortable about using gendered bathrooms. Now, please, I do not blame this particular workplace. It was a really, really great place to work, actually. I hadn't come out yet or even explored or understood those feelings that I was having, but we would often have conversations about being trans or non-binary at work, and I just was kind of indicating and starting and initiating those conversations and learning more about what it was like to be non-binary, making friends with trans people, etc. And looking back on that now, that was because I felt safe there, and I was definitely questioning myself at the time. I just didn't really put the two and two together. After that happened, I then went to an exhibition called Kiss My Genders, which was a wonderfully queer event. There were loads of LGBTQ+ people at the event and at the exhibition, and there were loads of LGBTQ+ artists there as well. And I essentially just went around and like snapped every single thing I could and was like just soaking all of this in. I was learning loads about gender, I was learning loads about binary, and I was learning about non-binary and the history of it, etc. And they also had gender neutral bathrooms there, and again I had that real sense of gender euphoria, that I felt seen and I didn't feel uncomfortable going into a gendered bathroom, and I felt safe as well. So then moving on from there, I kind of started to think a little bit more about that. I'd had that experience at the exhibition, I had that experience at work, etc. I was probably around 18 at this point, 18, 19, and I kind of started to question myself and the fact that I'd never really felt particularly connected to womanhood. I always felt very uncomfortable as I was on my period. I always used gender neutral language for myself. I never really had that connection with wanting to be a mother. Again, not things that mean that you are non-binary, this is just me. It's just like a puzzle piece, I guess, of lots of little bits that I can put together, and then I'm like, there's the whole picture. I do not think that women or anybody should be forced to have children, and I don't think that having a children is purely for women either. There's lots of trans and non-binary people that also have children. It's just that for me, I just never really had that connection that like my other friends had. They were always very, very baby focused, and that just wasn't something for me. And putting back to it now, it's because of society's kind of constant need to gender being a parent to motherhood, mother and baby groups, etc, etc, rather than just a gender neutral term. So that was kind of why I think I felt so repelled from that side of things, because I never really felt like it was something that I fitted in with. So I kind of started to process those feelings. I started to take quizzes to find out if I'm really non-binary. To be honest, quizzes aren't really much help, but for me it kind of helped me understand a little bit more about myself and the discomfort and uncomfort that I'd been feeling for a long time. I also started to ask myself questions about myself, and I also wrote these down, so I thought I would read these out to you. Things like, am I comfortable being perceived as a man or a woman? And kind of thinking about it, I was kind of like, I don't feel like I am either of those things. Perceiving is a little bit of a difficult question for me, but I don't feel that I am either of those things, and I wouldn't want somebody to assume I am. I also ask myself questions, things like, do you feel confined by your assigned gender? Do you feel limited by it or anxious about it? Do you feel like your assigned gender doesn't quite fit in with who you really are? And these were kind of all questions that I answered and was like, oh yeah, I'm not sure I necessarily do, etc. And to be honest, you know, you don't have to answer perfectly to all of these questions, whatever that means. Like, you don't need to get all of them right to be non-binary, or you don't need to relate to all of the questions to be non-binary, etc. It was just, for me, what helped me understand my gender and my identity. And once I kind of got to the answer in the bottom of all of these, that helped me to build an understanding of myself and my gender identity. From there, I also started to ask friends and family that I felt close and safe with to use pronouns they, them, and my pronouns kind of slowly came to life a little bit. I put them online, etc. And I bought things like badges and t-shirts with they, them on, and from there I was kind of like no longer wincing at the idea of she, her, because I was feeling much more confident with they, them. And I know that I kind of look typically female, so mistakes happen, and you know, that is going to happen, and it's fine, and I'm not necessarily 100% sure that I am comfortable with how I look. Not that there is a way to look non-binary. Non-binary people do not owe you androgyny. You can be non-binary and dress however you feel more comfortable, but for me personally, I think that there is probably a road still to go down about the way that I'm going to look and perceived to other people. But currently we're kind of in a pandemic, and I'm still not really 100% sure where I am with my gender at the moment, so I wouldn't want to say, you know, this is what I'm going to do, this is what I'm going to do, etc., because I don't really know. And also I think it's really cool and exciting to experiment with how you look, and there isn't necessarily one way to look, and there isn't really such thing as looking non-binary. Non-binary people can look and present themselves in all different ways, and that is okay. So you might be sat at home thinking like, well, how do I know if I'm non-binary? This is just your experience. I want to know if I'm non-binary. And the truth is, I can't really give you an answer. I can give you some pointers, but I can't really say to you like, I am non-binary, etc. So first thing to do, I would say, is follow other non-binary creators, you know, have friends that are non-binary, learn about the LGBTQ+ community, learn about what being non-binary is, and listen to other non-binary voices and things like that. Ask yourself questions about, you know, if you think you're non-binary, and I'll leave some resources down below about some of the questions I asked myself. It's completely okay to question your gender, and the truth is it can be really hard and difficult to question your gender, and it's okay to take time with that, and it's also okay to question your gender and, you know, find out that you're not non-binary at the end of it, and that's also okay as well. It's all about experimenting, and it can take months, years, even longer to kind of come to terms with your gender, and it doesn't automatically mean that you are going to change the way that you look, etc. It could just be the way that you feel, or you may, you know, want to go further down the line and think about how you present yourself, etc. But it definitely can be really tough. And if you're thinking about using new pronouns, etc., please do feel free to write them down below, and we can kind of help you a little bit by writing sentences like "they are really cool," etc., and see if that makes you feel a little bit more comfortable. But yeah, the other thing that you can also do is contact your GP and request to talk to somebody about it, like a therapist, etc. They may be able to help you understand your identity a little bit more if it is something that you are really struggling with. But the truth is that it's completely okay to question your gender identity. It's okay to ask yourself questions. Yeah, so for me there wasn't really one big moment. There was no fireworks. It was just a case of me kind of growing an understanding of the community, then realizing that the uncomfort that I'd been feeling wasn't normal, I guess. I think when I was younger, I just always thought it was normal to feel uncomfortable in my gender and using she, her pronouns, etc. And it was just a case of then experimenting, trying new things out, trying out different pronouns, understanding what it's like to be non-binary, what non-binary is, etc., and just building that understanding. So there definitely wasn't one moment that I was like, this is it, or, you know, nothing amazing happened or anything like that. I'm definitely still questioning my gender. I'm 23 now, and I don't necessarily think that I'm kind of at a final point with my gender, and I might be questioning my gender forever, and that's also okay. And I definitely haven't even come out in all aspects of my life yet. I'm not out at work, for example, things like that, in areas that I might not feel particularly safe, and that's okay too. It's okay to come out in a process, and it's okay to question your gender. And yeah, so that's kind of how I came to terms with being non-binary. I'm sorry that I don't really necessarily have a kind of final like, oh, this is what happened and this is how you're gonna know, because I have tried to kind of watch videos etc where people claim to do this, and I just never really felt that everybody's experience is the same. But yeah, it's just a case of following other non-binary people, questioning your gender yourself, talking to therapists, talking to your doctor etc if you feel that you need that extra support, and yeah, learning that there's no way a non-binary person like looks, and that there's no set pronoun for a non-binary person. Non-binary people who use a whole range of different pronouns, and that's also okay. There'll be non-binary people who use she her pronouns, he him pronouns, they them pronouns, neo pronouns etc, and they're all valid, and that's okay. This is just my personal experience of what it was like for me to be non-binary, and hopefully it helps you a little bit to understand my experience. And weirdly, it was kind of a bit of a difficult video to make, because I think my process to coming to where I am today isn't one direct line. It was lots of little things, like a puzzle, as I explained at the beginning. There wasn't like one thing that happened that I was like, wow, this is it. It definitely took time. It was a road, it was a process. And actually thinking back on things today when I was filming this, I was like, oh, okay, so that's probably why I felt like that. So it kind of felt a little bit like a therapy session where we were like uncover things. And yeah, for me it wasn't kind of like one really big issue that was really bothering me. It was lots of little things that kind of clicked together, and that's kind of how I came to where I am today. And I do worry often that I'm not non-binary enough. Not that there's any such thing, but you know, I get misgendered quite often. Mistakes happen, and that's completely fine. It's just more when people online do it on purpose. I get quite a lot of hate messages and things like that about it. So I do often feel that I'm not non-binary enough, or I don't look non-binary, and all of these feelings I think are normal feelings within our very gendered binary society that we live in, and it can be really difficult to assert yourself within that society when you look a certain way. You know, I am typically female looking, and it can be very difficult to kind of assert my non-binary gender within that, and that's definitely tough, and I think normal to feel this way. But if you're also feeling this way, you are not alone in this either. I think that other people also feel this way too, and you are valid, you are non-binary enough, and you are normal for questioning your gender, and that is okay, and transphobes suck. So yes, there we go. That's kind of how I came to my conclusion of being a non-binary person. So I hope that it helped you in your journey, and I'm always here for you, and other people in the LGBTQ+ community are also here for you. So yeah, you know, you are loved and valid. So thank you so much for watching this video. That was my little story about how I came to terms with non-binary and my gender experience. And yeah, as I said, let me know yours down below, and if you do want to keep up to date with me and be able to submit video requests and things like that, please follow me at Disabled Eliza across all social media. And if you did like this video, make sure to give it a big thumbs up and subscribe to my channel down below. It's free and you get to see more of me. Look after all of you, stay safe today, please don't go out and party for New Year. I'm in tier 4 at the moment, and I'm also starting to feel a little bit unwell, so I'm going to get tested for COVID later on. But yeah, look after all of you, stay safe, wash those hands, and I will see you in 2021. Have a great one. Bye!